Well, coming up exclusively on Left, Right and Centre, an interview with John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor of the United States, someone who says that the US's handling of India has been deeply problematic. However, the relationship appears to have been now taking on a more even keel, with Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi exchanging social media messages and seeming to suggest that the relationship is important. Be that as it may, and before we speak to Mr. Bolton, let's just go through some of the insults which India received. Is this a friend that we can truly trust? Many of these remarks have been coming from Pete Navarro, a White House advisor. For example, Navarro has said India's keyboard minions are hijacking X's community notes to buy the facts. He said this on the 10th of September. So at a time when India and America started talking peace, Navarro was still tweeting away. Earlier, he had said that Brahmins were profiteering at the expense of Indians. This was his objection to India continuing to import Russian oil. If India, the world's largest democracy, was to be treated or wants to be treated like a strategic partner of the US, it needs to act like one, is what he said earlier. But there were other remarks as well. India's big oil lobby has turned the largest democracy in the world into a massive refining hut and oil money laundromat for the Kremlin. But there have been remarks from Donald Trump which have also been problematic. Looks like we've lost India and Russia to deepest, darkest China. May they have a long and prosperous future together, is what Trump said on the 5th of September. It's been a totally one-sided disaster. Also, India buys most of its oil and military products from Russia, very little from the US. I don't care what India does with Russia. They can take their dead economies down together for all I care. He said that on the 31st of July. The relationship appeared to be plummeting, but off late, it seems to be somewhat better. Is that going to last? Well, from a period of several weeks where the United States had all sorts of concerns about India, the state of trade with India, India's continued import of Russian oil, to one where it appears that Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have started the process of fixing the strain on the relationship. It's been quite a ride. Joining us now for his perspective on this, Mr. John Bolton, former National Security Advisor of the United States. Thanks, sir, very much for being with us. When I was talking to you a few weeks back, the relationship seemed to be headed in only one direction, down. But it appears that both Trump and Modi have fixed things to a certain extent. Do you believe that it's going to last?
Well, Donald Trump sees international relations through the prism of his personal relationship with foreign leaders. So from Trump's perspective, if he and Prime Minister Modi have a good personal relationship, everything is fine between India and the United States. Obviously, it's much more complicated than that. But at least from the Trump perspective, it's better than tweets and statements that are negative about Prime Minister Modi. I think we've got some serious issues to talk about here. I think it's now even more important to try to see if India and the U.S. can align themselves here after the attack on Poland by Russian drones just the other day. The Russians, of course, say this was purely accidental, but the NATO authorities say 19 drones crossed into Polish airspace. That's quite some accident, I must say. And so this question of what Russia is up to, not just in Ukraine now, but threatening Poland, a NATO member. So the question of what resources Russia has to fight these various struggles becomes even more important. And I think this is a circumstance, especially given the growing China-Russia axis, where we need to avoid acting hastily. We need to have especially conversations between New Delhi and Washington, because I think we should be aligned on this, and I think we can get to that point.
The fact that we had Prime Minister Modi in China, in Tianjin, where he met Vladimir Putin, President Xi, there's a reset in the relationship with China. That's absolutely clear. The basis at one level of the relationship, the strategic relationship between India and America, was premised on the threat posed by China to India and to the Asia-Pacific region. But if there is a reset in ties between India and China, does that somehow dilute the premise of the strategic partnership between Washington and Delhi?
Well, I think it depends on whether you believe somehow China has changed its hegemonic aspirations all along its Indo-Pacific periphery, and I don't think they have. I think that celebration in Beijing was a very well done and successful propaganda effort, first to rewrite the history of World War II to tell us all that actually it was the Chinese Communist Party that defeated Japan. The Chinese nationalists didn't have much of a role. The United States didn't have much of a role, but it was intended to legitimize the leadership of China today and to project their power forward. And I think everybody in America understood the potential significance of Modi being there with Xi Jinping. And I understand his motives for going, but I think when you think strategically, you have to look hard at reality, and the reality coming out of Beijing remains, I think, very threatening. I think the various things that Trump had done to raise tensions with India, not just the tariffs because of Russian oil and gas purchases, but cutting off the negotiations on the underlying tariffs and just arbitrarily imposing 25%. And then his various comments about having prevented war between India and Pakistan after the last terrorist attack in Kashmir. I mean, these are all factors that I can understand would affect thinking in New Delhi. But the bigger picture is the hard strategic reality, not just the strange things Donald Trump does. So these realities remain, and I think if we consider them in a low-key, non-public fashion and work them out, that the course ahead will become a lot easier for both Washington and New Delhi.
Sir, are you surprised at the pace at which things seem to have been fixed? There's been this social media peace overture by Donald Trump. Prime Minister Modi responded to it. That actually happened 2 times around. Positive messages from both sides. It is bizarre at one level that these things get sorted out on social media, but they do evidently. Mike, I'll go back to my first question. Is this likely to be lasting, or just on the basis of the relationship between the two men, or do you believe that there is some sort of an agreement or deal which has been informally struck?
Well, my understanding is that discussions on the basic trade issues, the trade and tariff issues, have resumed, and that is a positive development, and they will work themselves out in the strange way that trade negotiations work out. And I do certainly acknowledge that these days social media do provide a means of communication, and I think the exchange of messages has been positive. I think all that's right. But now you get to the hard question and the most important question of the concrete significance of now that they've started talking again. So I think it's encouraging, but just objectively too soon to tell whether we'll make progress. I certainly hope we do, because the stakes for both countries are very high.
There is no indicator that India will stop importing Russian oil. Is that a showstopper for Washington still?
Well, I think what could be happening now, the Europeans are talking about this, the irony here is that under the sanctions that Europe and the United States wrote, it had 2 objectives: reduce Russian revenue to fund its war in Ukraine, but also by putting a price cap below which it was permissible for non-European, non-American purchasers to buy oil. It was intended not to exclude Russian oil from the market so as not to drive price at the gasoline pump in the U.S. and Europe too high. Those objectives were mutually contradictory. I think now that you'll see a movement toward a more blanket sanction against Russia that's being discussed now. We faced a similar question in 2018 when the Trump administration withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, reimposed all of our prior sanctions, but found some countries like India, like Japan, like a few others who had been purchasing Iranian oil when the sanctions had been lifted, that were caught in a difficult position. And we worked with those countries, with the Middle Eastern oil producers. And it may not have been a perfect solution, but it was a way to transition away from Iranian oil in substantial measure. I think something similar should be considered in a transition away from Russian hydrocarbons. The specifics may well be difficult, I acknowledge that, but I hope in a spirit of cooperation to try and keep things together, we can look at some kind of alternative like that.
Peter Navarro, of course, has a mind of his own, and despite what Trump and Modi may have agreed on, he seems intent on harming the relationship. Now, to Washington and New Delhi's benefit, nobody on either side seems to be taking this very seriously beyond a point. It's interesting reading, but it's bizarre. Would you agree?
Yeah, look, I've been in meetings between Trump and Modi with Peter Navarro there, who was just trying to start an argument. I've said, if you left Peter alone in a room and came back an hour later, he'd be in an argument with himself. So I hope the real negotiators here can sit down. I'm not saying these issues are going to be easy or quickly resolved, but I think there'll be good faith on both sides, and that's the way to try and work through it. And you can stay away from the threats and shouts in social media and just do the hard work and see if we can't reach an accommodation here.
Ambassador Bolton, what you said is quite interesting. Did you say that you were in a room with Peter Navarro and Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump, where it appeared to you that all that Navarro was trying to do was start a fight? Could you tell us more about that incident?
Well, this was a meeting where I had hoped that the two leaders would talk about strategic issues, as dealing with China, dealing with enormous threats that we face through the rest of the century, and Peter just wanted to talk about what he thought were unfair Indian trade practices. Look, I have watched trade people do this. There are always grievances in trade issues. It's in the nature of the subject matter, but between India and the United States for the rest of the century, there are very, very important, indeed existential questions here. I'm not diminishing the importance of trade. It makes a huge difference in both economies, but let's keep it in perspective. That I guess is how I would put it.
A final question. The death of Charlie Kirk, very unfortunate that anybody should be shot in this manner. Your thoughts. It is ironic that he was talking about gun control laws, from his own standpoint, of course, when he was shot. Sitting as I am in the other part of the world, it just seems strange for a lot of us over here to think that America is a country where people can buy, procure guns, and float around with guns in this manner, and then you've got political leaders, being killed.
Well, I think, look, this is a tragedy under any analysis of what happened here. And he was out doing what really had made him such an influential figure. This was a tour based on the slogan, "Come and prove me wrong." In other words, you have a disagreement, let's talk about it. Let's make our arguments and see who prevails. And to see this kind of violence is just terrible, and it threatens the fabric of American political society. There's no question about it.
All right, Mr. Bolton, it's been great talking to you. Thank you very much, and hopefully the India-US relationship does get back on an even keel and stays that way. Thanks very much, sir, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.